It's great to see you today, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. It is 2 o'clock, so we'll get started in just a moment. We'll give folks a few extra minutes to join. But while you're waiting for us to get started, if you could please add your name and your organization into the chat box. Thanks, everyone. Welcome everybody who's joined already. Just a reminder, if you could please add your name and your organization in the chat box. We'll get started in just a moment. Wonderful. Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to have you with us today, and welcome to a special edition of the nonprofit sector call hosted by the United Way of Southern Nevada. Again, if you're just joining us, please add your name and organization in the chat box. My name is Aaron Krolikowski, and I serve as the Interim Vice President for Community Impact at the United Way of Southern Nevada. And as many of you might know, January is National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. And today we have 4 very special guests with us who are leading efforts across Southern Nevada to reduce human trafficking in our community. We're very happy to have with us today Danielle Staple, Executive Director of Signs of Hope, who will share more about local victim services for victims and survivors of human trafficking. We're also very pleased to welcome Lieutenant Noel Roberts from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and the Southern Nevada Human Trafficking Task Force. Also joining our panel today is Amy Marie Merrell, who serves as the Executive Director of the Cupcake Girls, and Elena Espinoza is also joining us. And Elena serves as the Director of Programs and Initiatives for Puentes, Las Vegas. Some of you may know, but some may not know, that human trafficking most often takes the form of labor trafficking or sex trafficking, sometimes both. And it is the act of compelling someone to work for little or no pay through force, fraud, or coercion. And unfortunately, it's estimated that there are nearly 12,000 victims of sex trafficking in Nevada every year, with nearly half being children. United Against Human Trafficking is an initiative funded by UPS and United Way that is currently active in 4 cities across the United States: Las Vegas, Atlanta, Louisville, Kentucky, and Brownsville, Texas. Here in Las Vegas, the United Way of Southern Nevada is very proud to sponsor the Nevada Policy Council on Human Trafficking. Now, the Policy Council is chaired by Lauren Boytel of Impact NV and a group of very committed volunteers. The Policy Council brings together key organizations working on human trafficking in our community and across the state of Nevada. This includes law enforcement, hotels and resorts, elected officials, academic partners, and nonprofit agencies like many of you on the call today. During the 2021 legislative session, the Policy Council regularly met to discuss and share feedback on new laws that would do things like expand the state government's jurisdiction to act on instances of human trafficking. The new laws from last session also extend the statute of limitations for prosecutions of human traffickers, And we've made progress as a state toward expanding support for children who become victims at the hands of traffickers. Now, we understand how difficult and disturbing this topic can be for many people. And so I need to share that the audience will be muted during our presentation today and the panel discussion, but we will have a chance for Q&A from the audience at the end of today's session. So please feel free to add your questions to the chat box while the presentation and panel discussion are taking place. One final note before we get started. If you yourself or you suspect a friend or community member might be a victim of human trafficking, please contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888-373-7888. You can also text Be Free to the number 233-733. And we'll put this information in the chat box in just a few moments. So before we get started, my colleague Janet Quintero from United Way has asked if we can all turn on our cameras for a big group photo. So Janet, can you let us know when you're ready, and then we'll get the panel started.
I will give everyone 2 more seconds, just in case we have anyone that wants to turn on their camera. Okay, ready everyone, and big smile. Okay, now give me 1 second to make sure that I got it. Another one, and we are good. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Janet. So as I mentioned earlier, we are very happy to have a committed group of panelists who are at the forefront of this critical challenge of human trafficking here in our community. And so I'd now like to invite our panelists to share a brief introduction and a bit about the organization that they work for. So let's get started with Danielle Staple from Signs of Hope.
Good afternoon, everyone. Gosh, it's great to see so many wonderful partner community agencies checking in on the chat, and just the number of people that we regularly see in our community that are so passionate about this issue and want to learn more and want to do more. It's just so amazing. So a little bit about Signs of Hope. We are the largest and really only dedicated organization in the state of Nevada that specifically focuses on sexual violence and exploitation. And we have been doing so for getting very close to 50 years now in our community. Within that, we have been serving victims of human trafficking for probably about the last 10 or 11 years through our counseling center and other services, and then more intensely since we took on the RISE program a little over 2 years ago. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that later. But really, just again, so grateful. We have so many wonderful community partners that we work with. And there's no way any of this work around trafficking could be done or accomplished without all these different partners being committed and interested in better serving all of the clients that we have out there. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Lieutenant Roberts, can we hand things over to you for an introduction?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. And I just want to say I really appreciate the invite and the opportunity to speak as one of the panelists, and I look forward to answering any questions. My name is Noel Roberts. I am the Vice Section Lieutenant here for Las Vegas Metro. We are a part of the Southern Nevada Human Trafficking Task Force. Our section is made up of different squads. 2 of the squads are dedicated. They're part of the FBI task force to combat human trafficking, but our other squads also play a heavy part in combating all the human trafficking that we see out there. I've been on for 22 years, and I just came back to Vice back in November, but I was a detective here for 4 years, starting back in 2006. So it was a long time ago, and I bring that up because a lot has changed in the time since when I was here before. The detectives are still doing great work, and really doing a great job of identifying victims and putting traffickers away. But the big difference that I see now is our involvement with the nonprofits, with Signs of Hope and Rise, the Rise advocates that are with us. In my opinion, that is a total game changer that I have seen, and the impact that we are actually having. And I'm seeing it daily. Having advocates and having all these nonprofit organizations, all of us teaming up. And no longer will I ever say that our nonprofits are resources that we go to. It's now a partnership. And I think that's been the biggest things, that every detective up here looks at Rise and all the nonprofits that are helping us combat this problem as partners. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Roberts. We'll hand things over to Amy Marie Merrell from the Cupcake Girls.
Hey, thank you so much, Aaron, and thank you so much, everyone at United Way, for putting on this panel. I feel really honored to share this space with my fellow panelists. And I just really want to say thank you so much to all of the nonprofit partners on this call. This work can be so heavy and so hard. And then I look around at all of you, at all of the helpers, at everyone that's doing the work to combat these issues together. And I personally have so much hope. So thank you so much for being here and for the work that you are doing, have done, and continue to do. The Cupcake Girls provide confidential support to those involved in the sex industry, as well as those affected by domestic sex trafficking, through holistic resources, advocacy, and aftercare. We provide non-judgmental support to empower our clients in their pursuits through respect, resources, and relationships, truly taking a non-judgmental view, non-judgmental lens at the situation that somebody's in, what work that they might be in, but really just looking at them as fellow humans and working to help them achieve their goals and their timing. We do that through a referral program where our clients who have 1 to 2 particular needs are able to go access vetted and safe, inclusive partners and resources who have agreed to see our clients pro bono or at a reduced cost. These individuals might be an individual or an organization in the community, and that includes doctors, tax preparers, therapists, parent and family resources, including but not limited to Olive Crest is a phenomenal partner here in the community working to create strong families, and many, many more. And I'm really thankful to all of you again for having us here and for hearing a little bit more about us and the work that we do. And I'm excited to have this conversation with you all today.
Thank you, Amy. And last but certainly not least, Elena, can we hand things over to you for your introduction?
Yes, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Like all the other partners have said, thank you for the invitation, United Way, to participate in this panel discussion. This is truly a collaborative multi-sector effort, and now more than ever, given our layerings, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this, of other social global things happening, we really are grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation. My name is Elena Espinoza, and I am Director of Programs and Community Initiatives with Puentes, a Las Vegas-based community development nonprofit agency. I believe we might be the youngest of the group. We have been in existence since 2019, and we aim to support communities, specifically marginalized and vulnerable communities, both by being involved in a wide range of community initiatives and services and collaboratives that meet the local needs. And so right now we are focused, however, this is fluid and organic as we address the relevant needs of our communities. We are focused on healthcare and health access, education, and workforce development. A fourth area of interest through our grassroots advocacy and organizing, which is part of what we do at Puentes, is a fourth relevant need that we've discovered in our communities, which we're all aware of as we work within victim services. And that is the need to develop culturally responsive protocols, frameworks to address the violence and the exploitation that might occur with the most vulnerable community members amongst us. And so on that end, we are developing a series of designs and frameworks that will address this need for culturally inclusive, culturally responsive ways of addressing victims of crime, including human trafficking. And so thank you for the opportunity, and we look forward to further discussion.
Thank you so much, Elena, and thank you to all of our panelists for those excellent introductions. We'll get back to all of you in just a few moments, but right now we're going to hand things back over to Danielle Staple from Signs of Hope, who will share an overview of the RISE program that you may have heard Lieutenant Roberts mention is working very closely with Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department on instances of human trafficking. So Danielle, are you ready?
I am. I think that might be the end of the presentation though. So we might have to switch that. Yes, thank you so much again for having us. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate what Lieutenant Roberts said. And, you know, even before I actually came to Signs of Hope, I, for a short time, worked with another human trafficking specific related organization. And I remember at the time reaching out to the task force coordinator at that time and working with the vice lieutenant at that time. And I very clearly recall being told, you know, that taking to them that best practice across the country was having advocate and law enforcement joint response to victims of human trafficking, and being told that will never happen here, literally. And so to hear our vice lieutenant now say, you know, how valuable and critical those joint services are is just, I think, an amazing statement as to where we've come and gotten to as a community, and you know, is just an incredible statement. So really appreciate him saying that. And you know, I think just reflecting how far we've come certainly doesn't mean we don't have very far to go as well, but certainly represents a lot of the progress that has occurred. So next slide, please. So we began the RISE program a little over 2 years ago, as I mentioned, and RISE stands for Resources and Integration for Survivor Empowerment. And that really is very much how we approach this work, in terms of always being aware that the ability to move out of a trafficking situation is very individual, it's very challenging, and it is all about empowering that individual with the resources and that vision of where they can and how they can reintegrate into a healthier situation for themselves and their families. So along with that, the RISE program includes multifaceted services, so a 24-hour crisis response, intensive case management, individual and group mental health supports, as well as education and training programs. And we'll talk a little bit more about what all that looks like throughout. So next slide, please. So a little bit about our team. So I am a part of the RISE team, but just a very small part, and I want to be very upfront and honest about that from the beginning. For example, I tend to focus on the policy work and sitting on the policy council that Erin mentioned, and obviously some of the grant oversight and other things that would be, you know, within my purview. But it's really Brittany Hopley and the rest of the team that is entirely focused on RISE, that do this work literally on a 24/7 basis, and are out there with clients, out there with law enforcement, you know, doing all of this. So I just want to be really clear and give that team a shout out. It is incredibly challenging work. It is very intense, it is very exhausting, and it never stops. It happens on the weekends, it happens on holidays, and our team is just amazing in serving these clients. So sorry, it's okay. You can. So a little bit more about that team. So it's Brittany, who's the program director, and then we have Joanna, who's our client services manager. We have 3 full-time case managers, a full-time housing and employment specialist, 2 folks who work part-time after hours and doing outreach, a part-time student supervisor. At any given time, we tend to have 3 to 5 social work or criminal justice interns, as well as numerous volunteers. We do have 1 human trafficking specific therapist that works under these grants, as well as an anti-human trafficking training specialist. So that's a pretty big team. And it takes literally all of them, and I could probably add multiple staff members to that team, and they would all have plenty to do. So just a little bit of, to get a sense of just, what it's taking to do this work on this intensive basis. So next slide, please. So Lieutenant Roberts mentioned the Southern Nevada Human Trafficking Task Force. And so one of the main funding sources for our work, it comes through what's called the Enhanced Collaborative Model Grant. And that funds the Human Trafficking Task Force in 2 pieces. It funds the law enforcement partner and then a victim services partner that work very closely together to address all of the needs in the community as victims are identified. And so what those task force activities, and this is where Brittany's work really focuses as the program director, is daily partnership with law enforcement. So anytime law enforcement, anytime 24/7 identifies a victim, they're reaching out to our advocates to respond to that situation. We also accompany and work with various forms of law enforcement. It isn't just vice. We also work with Homeland Security and the FBI and other federal partners, as well as other aspects of Metro that identify individuals that may be victims of human trafficking. And that happens with accompaniment on proactive investigations, doing outreach together, a variety of different things. They're also constantly attending multidisciplinary team meetings with the district attorney's office and other entities as well. There are multiple task force committees that we sit on in various forms. And then Brittany also serves as the leader of the Victim Services Committee. And a big part of what that group is doing, and I know many of the nonprofit organizations that are on the call today are members of the Victim Services Committee and regularly go to that. And you'll all know that we do and have been focusing on identifying what do best practices in the field of human trafficking look like. How can we outline those in terms of what training do people need? What kind of approach should people be taking? What needs to kind of be outlined so that we know that if we're making a referral for services, that someone is getting a trauma-informed, very best practice approach that is going to serve them in the best way possible. Because we know our clients are, often so vulnerable. They often have had negative experiences with different service providers. And so it takes, unfortunately, sometimes very little to dissuade them from continuing to seek services. So making sure that when they come into services, they're approached in a welcoming and appropriate way is so critical to their ongoing engagement with services. So next slide, please. So the 24-hour crisis response is a huge aspect of what we do, obviously. And so that entails our alert hotline. And alert stands for Advocate Law Enforcement Response Team. And so that is a 24-hour in-person response anytime a victim of human trafficking is identified by law enforcement. We are also working currently with the hospitality industry to try to get a response to hotel security when they identify a victim, even if that person doesn't want to speak with law enforcement, that there would still be an advocate that would be available to go and speak with them and provide them services. That hotline also ties in the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So if they get a call for someone here in the Las Vegas area, and that is a client in need of services through our advocacy work, they get connected through that hotline as well. So it's, getting very much busier than it was when we first started it. We're routinely now getting between 12 and 20 to 25 calls a month for response. And again, that can come any time of day or night. That also includes client outreach through Signs of Hope's regular publicly available hotline. So a client doesn't necessarily have that alert hotline. It's more of a kind of a backline number for law enforcement or other professionals. But if a client of human trafficking or a victim of human trafficking needs support, all of Signs of Hope's volunteers and staff are trained in human trafficking to be able to serve individuals that might come through our publicly available hotline. And whenever those advocates do respond, they're able to provide immediate needs, so food, clothing, hygiene products, getting that individual into shelter, doing some, short-term safety planning. In some cases, it's providing emergency transportation to reunite them or reunify them with family elsewhere. So it's really whatever is needed in that moment. And depending on the choice of the individual, and I want to really emphasize that we try to be out there to make sure that people know that there are resources and support available. And we very much work on a stages of change model, recognizing that folks are going to be at various points in their ability to leave their situation and engage with services. And so we try to just emphasize whenever people are ready, our services are there and waiting for them. We have an open door policy so that people can leave services and come back in 2 hours, in 2 days, in 2 months, in 2 years, doesn't matter. And so, some people we will just have a very short interaction with in terms of a like a crisis response situation. We may help the person get into shelter. They may leave shelter the next day and we never hear from them again. Those that do choose to get involved in intensive case management will go through an in-depth intake process that can often take 2 to 3 meetings with the client just to get through the intake. It's addressing those immediate needs. We are very grateful to work with a lot of wonderful shelter partners. Again, I know several of them are on the call. We also have a transitional housing program through and in partnership with St. Jude's Ranch that we're very grateful for and has been a wonderful partnership. We have about 10 families in long-term housing through that program. And then we're also providing transportation assistance, connecting them with education and career training, legal needs through Legal Aid of Southern Nevada and other organizations, connecting them to all types of mainstream and public benefits that they may qualify for, as well as mental health counseling, going with them to court. And this population is a little bit unique because sometimes we're accompanying them to court as a victim, and sometimes we're accompanying them to court because they're the defendant in a case. So it's that looks a little bit different than it might in other types of victim services quite often. And then for those that don't have documentation, we're helping them. And that can be just getting a new Social Security card because theirs was taken by the trafficker, or helping people through the visa process through our partner agencies to be able to legally work in the United States and be able to become permanent residents, et cetera. So next slide, please. So a little bit in terms of our data, and we literally just got about 2 days ago our data for the last 6 months. So I was able to incorporate some of it, but not everything. But I did do some updating of the data that we have on our clients. So we one of the requirements of the Enhanced Collaborative Model grant is also that we have to partner with what they call an action research partner. And for us, that is the Sex Trafficking Intervention Research Program at Arizona State University. They are an amazing resource and analyze all of our client intake information and produce semi-annual reports that help us learn more about who we're serving, how we're serving them, the types of services people are looking for, the demographic breakdown of our clients, et cetera. So we've had 208 clients engage in long-term services. So this is not just a one-shot deal. These are folks that have completed that in-depth intake process over the course of the last 2 years, the first 2 years of our grant. So you can see the breakdown. The majority of those are victims of sex trafficking. We have also served, and we're increasing the number of folks we're serving who have also experienced labor trafficking. And then we have a fair number of folks that have experienced both sex and labor trafficking. In terms of the breakdown of age, the majority of clients we are seeing are adults, and then we have seen over 50 minors in those 2 years. And just to give you an idea, the range in age of the clients that we saw just in the last 6 months was anywhere from 15 to 54 years old. So a little bit more on some of the demographic data, because I know this is something that people ask about a lot. So of those that we served, 94% identified as female, 4% identified as male, and 2% identified as transgender. In terms of ethnic and racial background, they reported 52% identify as Black or African American, 22% white, 13% Hispanic or Latinx, 7% multiracial, 4% Asian, 1% Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and 1% Native American. So you can see, obviously, folks are impacted in all communities and all areas, but definitely disproportionately impacted our communities of color. So that's definitely a critical factor with our services and, being responsive to those needs. In terms of the types of services that people need, and this is where I think all of the myriad of service providers that are on this call is so great to see, because you can see from this data that our clients need a whole range of services. And it's our responsibility as the main victim service provider to connect clients with services, but we know we can't possibly provide all of those services directly through Signs of Hope. So it has to be through our partners that a lot of this is happening. So the largest need that clients present with are mental health and counseling services. Next is employment services, right? Because essentially this situation is what they've been living in as their employment situation as well, or what they've been, even if it's been limited, the amount of income that they're getting from it, that is kind of what their situation has been. And so getting them connected with employment services, job retraining, and just so much of it is ways to identify the skill sets that they have been building through what they've been forced to do, which is often really extensive. Folks have a lot of skill sets that are built up in what they are asked and forced to do and deal with on a daily basis, that is very translatable into being able to move into other industries and be very successful. And so it's really just reframing that for folks and getting them some other experiences. So transportation assistance is another area, educational services, mentoring, particularly for youth clients, medical services is a big one that clients come in with, and then clothing and basic needs and other services. And then in terms of where we get referrals from, you can see there, obviously, because of our very close partnership with law enforcement, that is our primary referral source. We get the majority of clients referred from Metro, and then the next being the National Human Trafficking Hotline. That's what NHTH stands for. And then, a variety of other organizations and community organizations that we work with also do, provide referrals for services. So the other piece that we have been expanding and are working towards is just this general understanding and education in the intersectionality and what consistent risk and protective factors, right, are across the board that are factors in many types of potentially negative outcomes for children in particular, and how we can help build their skill sets and build their knowledge base by educating children from a very young age about what consent means, what is coercion, what are healthy relationship boundaries that folks can just be educated to, how to serve as an active bystander if you do see somebody being exploited or harmed in any way through any type of violence. And then one of the other aspects of our funding is specific outreach for training with those communities that we know clients and victims of human trafficking are engaging with on a daily basis, right? So folks are going to need medical services at some point. They are going to be using public transportation or Uber or Lyft or airplanes or buses, you know, right? They're going to be using all of those things. And so we know folks in these sectors are interacting with potential victims all the time. And it's just a matter of helping them understand what it is they're looking for, how to identify someone, and then how to appropriately approach them with resources and information so that if they have an opportunity and are in a situation where they can get out, they know where they can go and how they can receive that assistance. So next slide, please. So a little bit about our funding, because I know that's a question that we get quite often. So the funding for that team and the services that they provide comes from a lot of different sources. So the largest one is the Enhanced Collaborative Model grant that, you know, I've mentioned before as that main victim service provider. We also have an additional grant from OVC for specialized services, which is what supports the transitional housing program, some of our training programs, and a couple of other pieces. We also get funding through VOCA, the Victims of Crime Assistance grant here in Nevada. We're very fortunate to have received some United Way funding to help support, in particular, our employment and housing connection pieces and education training for individuals, and to kind of wrap the whole family in services and connections to employment, and try to lift that whole family that may be impacted by that situation, hopefully out of poverty through connections and assistance in that way. And then we also feel very fortunate. We just recently got a lovely gift from MGM that's going to help with beefing up some of that crisis response piece, especially for the hospitality industry. So yeah, so that's a little bit about how that's all funded. And that's our contact information. Again, if anyone, I know we work with many of the organizations that I saw pop in the chat, but if there are, you know, ways that we can partner in new and different ways, if there are ways that we can assist in training, you know, staff at various organizations as to how to identify trafficking, you know, help staff with how to deal with situations, or just be a resource, you know, by calling and engaging with our amazing RISE team members or anything, we're more than happy to do that, and just continue to partner and you know, all work together to see how we can all improve and expand the number of folks that we're able to reach.
Thank you so much, Danielle, for sharing that overview. I think the data is incredibly informative and illuminating. And thank you so much for sharing a bit about the structure of the RISE program, the work you're doing in the community, and really how you're able to put it all together. Very informative. So just thank you so much for that overview. I'd like to go to some of our other panelists at this stage. We do have a few questions that have already come in, so we're going to start off with those questions. But I do want to remind everybody to please, if you do have questions, please add them to the chat box, and we'll get to those as we can. But first, Lieutenant Roberts, I'd like to go to you first. We've heard some really great information on the RISE program, and victim services in our community. But from your perspective in law enforcement, what impact has the pandemic had on your ability to support victims and survivors of human trafficking, especially as you work collaboratively with the RISE program and Signs of Hope?
Really, the pandemic hasn't affected us as far as our section is and what we're doing. And from what I've seen, it hasn't had an effect even with our advocates going out. They are out with us nightly. Like Danielle said, they are on call with us 24/7. When we identify a victim, they're coming out when someone's in crisis. So really, we've been able to kind of push through this, and a lot, huge part of it is our partnership with RISE and Signs of Hope.
Excellent, thank you. What kind of trends, if any, would you be able to share in terms of how human trafficking arrests and other enforcement activities related to human trafficking? How has that changed over the last, let's say, 3 to 5 years, if you have any information to share in that regard?
Well, I think the first thing, like I said, as I've come back into VICE, the awareness, I think it's now something that's being talked about all over the country. We here have changed up a little bit as far as our structure in the section, as to how we're going about identifying victims. We're taking a proactive approach. And like Danielle said, we're part of the enhanced collaborative model, which is victim-centered. And being here, that's kind of been our focus, is to continue to be victim-centered, but not stop on how we operate and how we go about our investigations, but to do it more in a proactive way. And so I think we're having a lot of success on identifying more victims, taking the proactive approach. And we're getting that word out there. And again, with so many nonprofit organizations, that's big for us to get that word out there and having that working relationship.
Thank you so much. Over to Elena. How has your work with Puentes been affected by the pandemic?
Yeah, I believe that part of what we're seeing is, and I'm sure all the agencies on the call have felt this with some of your clients, the deeper isolation, the isolation that the pandemic is still known for. And so this creates a sort of disengagement, not always by choice, obviously. This is a control tactic. Disengagement from the support system and the safe places that we had out in public places, such as schools, such as the medical healthcare systems and our doctors, etc. And so what we're noticing is that elements, or even the human trafficking itself as a crime, has gone deeper underground. And so what we're finding at Puentes now is that two things are happening right now. One is that there is, with the pandemic, we've had several sort of myths circulating. One around what is it really, and the state's role in it, in perpetuating. And this really affects communities of color. This sort of the distrust element, right? The building up of the systems that we need to reach marginalized community members. So we noticed an even deepening, a deeper deepening, if that's possible, distrust of state systems, both through the COVID and now, deepening elements of crimes such as domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking, and really rebuilding that trust. Also, we've found that in our grassroots work, a lot of the pandemic, due to its economic features and dynamics, really hit a lot of communities that already were economically vulnerable. it hit them even harder. And so our work has necessitated lately to really become involved more and more in the low wage and informal sector workplaces, right? So this is sort of that intersection between what are the crimes that are being underground, what are the sectors that are most impacted by human trafficking, and what are the community members that are being exploited around these realms. And so we've taken a look at how we engage workforce development, education, and build that trust. So a lot of the work that we're doing now at Puentes as a culturally specific, if you will, agency, community development agency, is rebuilding that nexus of trust in our communities by letting them know that we ourselves are partnering with certain sectors and certain community members, and therefore hopefully getting in that way through cultural conversations, through a deeper and nuanced understanding of how culture and plays a role in all these types of victimizations. So it's a combination of the distrust elements with the furthering undergrounding of certain sectors in which, unfortunately, communities of colors are overrepresented in. And so that's sort of the work that we are seeing through Puentes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Elena, for sharing those perspectives. Amy, what about your work with the Cupcake Girls and your team? You're right on the front lines as well. You're right on the ground. How has the pandemic changed your work?
It's been interesting because the pandemic showed up and we almost instantly had such an increase in requests for support. So we ended 2020 with a 300% client increase of requests for support. And we, at that time, had 12 staff members, majority volunteer run. And so it was around just under 200 volunteers that we had between both branches. We also have a branch in Portland, Oregon. And it was interesting because all of a sudden it was like, all right, we need to keep continuing our quality of care for our clients. And also we're having a lot of volunteers that are not able to come into work that would usually help hold this weight. And our staff members are feeling really burnt out. And I've talked with multiple other nonprofit agencies where it was like, all right, how do we keep up the quality of care for our clients while also really deepening care for our staff and for our volunteers? How do we make sure that the donors are really seeing the impact of their dollars, because we have an increase of client needs and we're needing an increase of dollars, right? But also not burn out our staff. And it was this interesting balance of trying to figure out the answer and trying to figure out how do we truly care for each other while we're caring for our community. And we had a phenomenal woman come in, Emma Sullivan, and she worked with people coming out of ISIS concentration camps for 2 years and really taught us about secondary trauma training and how to make sure that we as staff and as volunteers that we are building loops of resiliency in our lives and really making sure that we are not continuing into trauma loops that our clients are also experiencing, right? But building these loops of resiliency, building quality of care for ourselves so that we can continue to care for our clients. And then also making sure that partners that we're working with, the people that are offering this pro bono service to our clients, most of them, that they're cared for and checking in on them and making sure that they have everything that they need to continue to succeed with our clients in their lives. So it's been an interesting season, right, for all of us. But I'm really actually encouraged to see how we all looked inward a little bit. I liked what Elena was saying about the distrust of government systems, and we did see a lot of that with our clients as well. And I think it offered hard conversations to happen. And us to be able to just sit down with each other and say, hey, this is what's going on. We need to have this conversation because I've got 50 clients that really need help, and you're the only person that that we can have them connected with at this time. So we've got to have a hard conversation. Let's figure out how to make this relationship work well for everyone. And so I think there's a lot of beauty that came out of these hard conversations, this hard time, this pandemic. But it definitely has been felt with all of us, I think, in the nonprofit world, for sure.
Thanks, Amy. Great point. We can't forget about the helpers. We can't forget about the staff that are enabling all of this work to take place and all of this support. And it certainly has been tough on everybody in the nonprofit sector and everybody on the front lines of the pandemic in all ways, shapes and forms. So just a reminder to everybody, there is an opportunity for you to share your questions or comments in the chat box, and we'll get to those as they come in. But Elena, I'm hoping we can go to you for our next question. How can members of the general public support victims and survivors safely and appropriately?
Thank you for that question. We're always trying to sort of have this, if you will, bystander, right? This ripple effect that if we get to one or train one, hopefully they know five, and so that sort of word of mouth and knowledge sharing. We always say when we speak to the general public, depending on the space, but the baseline is the empathy and the non-judgmental. We start by, let me backtrack. We should say that anytime we feel like intervening in a situation of possible human trafficking, we always have to think safety first. I think that safety for the survivor that we're about to maybe engage or talk to, but also safety for myself, for ourselves as workers and frontliners. Having said that, we always encourage the trauma-informed approach, which the foundation of that is the work of empathy, non-judgmental, which requires active listening. Several of us agencies can offer those trainings, etc., but really be there for the story of the person that's sharing. Stories come in pieces as well, knowing that memory work and trauma affects how a story is delivered. So just stand back and instead, like we say in the field, instead of saying what's wrong, say what happened, and really listen. If you are in a position where it's a family member or somebody in your community that it might be frustrating for us, but we must remain patient. And as those people that I guess create empathy with cultural members or family members, and you are that person people come to you for to ask questions, know what resources are available, just generally speaking. Now we all know the agencies on this call, but also everybody else on this call, right? And so who are the agencies doing this work, the person that's in front of me, what would they like to see happen? And let them, their voice and where they see their vision of them healing, where it sees them taking them, let's move with them and really be open and have this be victim-centered. But also, I would say for those of us that are, now I'm going back to us as professionals and frontliners, if those of us that work in social service agencies especially, if we sort of wear that multiple hat, where we are a professional, but I'm also a community member, that we create certain awareness and the language around destigmatizing being a victim or destigmatizing sort of some of these things that we attach to victims of human trafficking, for example, especially in spaces that are culturally and marginalized in a certain way. So even in private community and family circles, we can be that voice and always advocate for the rights of victim survivors as human rights. I would say just listen, be there, and be open to all of this, and then know where to connect once the victim survivor is ready to do so. Those would be some starting points. Safety first. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Elena. Being victim-centered, we've heard that from a few panelists today as well, so that's incredible perspective that we need to continue to integrate into our work, as well as respecting the realities of private family space and community space and knowing what is culturally appropriate. So thank you for sharing that. Lieutenant Roberts, Amy, or Danielle, and do you have any other advice or suggestions for our audience today about ways that the general public can interact and ways that they can support victims and survivors in safe and appropriate ways?
Yeah, this is Danielle. I think, one of the things that we're always kind of working around is there is a lot of myth and misconception in this space, and a lot of how popular culture may depict this and glamorize these situations and different things. is something that really needs to be addressed, from a cultural perspective, to Elena's point, in terms of not, creating that sense of stigma or any issues for survivors. And the other piece of that is to really recognize that not everyone, but the great majority of individuals impacted by human trafficking have lifelong histories of other types of trauma and are in other, are often in marginalized communities or come from other challenges, have experienced adverse childhood experiences as children, and things like that. And so I think it's really important to recognize that this is a complex issue that has complex answers. There is no one size fits all or one magic bullet that is going to cure all of this. It is only with a lot of shared effort and commonality and intersectionality that we will really address these issues and come to better spaces for survivors. And for the general public, I would say also this concept of rescue, that we ever go in and rescue someone, is something I would really love to pull out of the popular language, because every single person is in such a unique situation. Often they are coming from these places of lifelong traumatic experiences, and so nobody's rescuing anyone. It is only through a lot of hard work and dedication on the part of these survivors that they are able to do what's necessary to move themselves past it. We are there as tools and resources for them, but each survivor does this themselves. And so, that sort of savior mindset, I guess, if you will, is something that we really want to address and clarify. And then, having said that, if this is something you are passionate about and want to get involved with, there are so many spaces and organizations in which to do that. It takes a lot of training. It takes a big time investment to be able to do it safely, to Elena's point, and well. But, we offer a training, and like I mentioned, we have volunteers on our alert hotline. So you could be that person who is going out with Lieutenant Roberts and his team to respond to a client, at 2 o'clock in the morning. If you have the proper training and interest and ability and willingness to do so. So all of our agencies need support from the community, whether it's, hygiene item drives, or it is going through volunteer training, or it's doing, holiday drives for the kiddos of our clients. There's something that anyone can do to get involved and be of support. We just really want them to do it from an informed place.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much, Danielle, for those suggestions. We are coming up on time, so I just want to open up the floor momentarily. Are there any questions from our viewers, from our participants today? Or any of our panelists? Okay, just a reminder, please, if you do have questions, you can still add them in the chat, and we will share them with our panelists after today's conversation. The last question I have for you all today, Amy, I'd like you to go first, if that's okay. Where can people go to learn more about the work your organization is doing to combat human trafficking here in Southern Nevada?
Yeah, so please go to our website, www.thecupcakegirls.org. And we also are very active on our social media at cupcakegirls.org. And I just wanted to say thank you so much again, United Way, Danielle, Sergeant Roberts, and Elena. Thank you so much for your time and everyone for joining us. This was very beautiful. It was nice to be a part of it. I appreciate you all.
Thanks, Amy. Elena, where can people go to learn about the work that Puentes is doing?
Yes, absolutely. You can reach out to myself, Elena Espinoza, at, I'm sure you're going to share my contact information for our agency. It's www.puenteslasvegas.org, or you can reach us on our phone number. You'll get me directly at 702-592-0056. Check us out. Thank you.
Thanks, Elena. And Lieutenant Roberts, where can people learn more about the work of Metro and the Southern Nevada Human Trafficking Task Force?
Well, with Metro, our LVMPD website, and then also our Southern Nevada Human Trafficking Task Force website, and there's a Facebook page. You can learn a lot about what the enhanced collaborative model is. I also suggest, I've been spending many of my days off doing a lot of research, reading, the enhanced collaborative model, what it really is. And I'm actually been Googling different task forces around the country, and I'm learning a lot just from seeing how different task forces operate and how they're set up. So I highly suggest Googling, human trafficking task forces around the country, and then kind of compare it to what we're doing here in Southern Nevada. And when we have panels like this and discussions like this, asking questions to me and, how are you comparing to these other places around the country? I read that they're doing this. How are you all handling that part? So I think that's the best informative information that I could pass on. And I just like to thank everyone. Aaron, thank you for the invite. Janet, thank you for the invite. It was a privilege to be here and to speak with everyone.
Thank you for joining. It was a privilege to have you here with us. Danielle, we will give you the final word. We saw a link to volunteering with RISE and Signs of Hope. How can people get involved and learn more about your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I'll give a shout out to Tia Stone, our director of community engagement, for posting our link. So definitely, volunteer opportunities, and also community engagement and partnership opportunities as well. A lot of the task force model involves, MOUs with partner organizations and, all the ability to work together to serve those clients. The other thing I will also mention is if anybody is interested in getting involved in the Victim Services Committee of the task force, we are always looking to build and grow that group. And if folks are wanting to learn more about those best practices that have been identified through the Victim Services Committee, and it's an area that you want to grow your organization in, I really strongly encourage you to get involved in the committee. In fact, they meet in a couple minutes. They meet the third Thursday of the month at 3 o'clock. So that meeting is just about to kick off, actually. But and you can reach out through our website as well related to the Victim Services Committee. We're actually about to do some expansion to that webpage related to that work. And I just would encourage folks to get educated themselves. There is so much out there about human trafficking. There's all of the organizations present and that do this work have websites and have ways to get engaged. So there's every opportunity, if this is something that you want to do, to be able to do so in a way that works and fits for you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Danielle. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Elena. And thank you, Lieutenant Roberts, again, for joining us for our panel today. And thank you, everybody who made time to join us for this really important conversation about a truly critical issue in our community. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Our next nonprofit sector call will be our normal format, and it will be on Thursday, February 3rd at 2 p.m.